Welcome to the Qualitox podcast. I'm Ian Kugler, your host, and my guest today is Oliver Rhode. Oliver is the founder and CEO of XENOPS Chemicals, a company that specializes on sourcing of fine chemicals for the life sciences pharma industries around the world. Oliver is also an expert on the Chinese market, and we're going to talk today with Oliver about the role that China plays in the global export market of raw materials for the pharma industry, about the challenges on finding the right supplier, about quality, the supply chain, and of course about the cultural differences that can make or break the deal. Hi, Oliver. Welcome to the Qualitex podcast.
Yes. Hello, Jan. Great being on your show. It's a pleasure.
So we want to talk today a bit about critical raw material sourcing from China. And as I understand, you're the person to go to.
Yeah, thanks a lot. My background in this industry is I used to work 25 years for big chemical and pharmaceutical companies. And a couple of years ago, I decided to start my own business. And what we are doing now is the customer-specific sourcing of critical raw materials, mainly for the pharmaceutical industry, but also sometimes for agrochemicals and other chemical applications.
Okay, so you worked a lot in a supply chain, and you said, "Let's do it alone." You got enough connections.
Yeah, it's I worked in a supply chain, but even more in procurement, and I did a lot of procurement in China. So that's why I discovered this country, and that's why I built up my network in that country. Because without the network, without the right colleagues, it's simply not possible.
And you're doing mostly the sourcing from China.
Yes, that is our focus. Of course, we have also good suppliers and good network in other countries. But since the Chinese chemical industry is so big, you cannot avoid to look for raw materials for intermediates in that country.
So how big is the market actually? How important it is for the pharma companies?
I think it's the most important market for pharmaceuticals, for raw materials, for intermediates, for key starting materials. So if you are a serious procurement person, you cannot afford to exclude this market. However, and we will probably touch this later too, it's always good to look at China, but also, of course, into other regions to have a balanced portfolio of suppliers from different regions, from different countries.
So not only China, but other regions, so Asia in general, or also European, African?
Well, if you have a chance to find an alternative supplier in Europe, in the United States, or North America, or even in Africa, that would be great. But for a lot of chemicals, there are not many alternatives outside of China. So that's why we also focus on this country.
So is it really no alternatives or not alternatives with the same cost value?
Well, today, if you are going to China just for cost reasons, then I would say this is a mistake. You should go
Why is
to
that?
because the time of really big cost advantages is over. You really have to make a proper total cost of ownership consideration or calculation, and then probably a Chinese supplier, Chinese manufacturer is good, has some advantages, but this should never be the only reason. You have to consider also other things like what is security of supply, what are then alternatives in other regions. So if you have alternatives, then you should consider them too.
Do you also get the right quality easily there?
Yes, because let's say in our industry, it's not possible to accept a low quality even if the price is lower. So the best quality, or let's say the required quality, that is mandatory. There's no compromise to accept any poor quality products. It doesn't make sense. Even if they are a little bit cheaper, we cannot use them. So quality is always the first thing what we are looking for. If we got for example, a specification from a client, then there is no doubt we are not going to negotiate about this specification. We are just looking for the right specification, and there is no compromise regarding the quality. This is always the top priority.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned also safety. How safe is the supply chain?
You mean how safe the supply chain from China is? I would say it really depends. It depends on your business partners. It depends on the overall situation. I would not say that there is a big advantage or disadvantage compared to others. It really depends on the product, on the manufacturer, and on your business partner. So if you cooperate with reliable people, reliable companies who have a track record in this industry, who can give you some references, then I would say from the production point of view, the supply is secured. Then, of course, you have logistic issues. It depends, where is your manufacturer located? Is it far away from the next port? What are the logistic options? And these things have to be taken in consideration when you are thinking about a supply from China, for example. Overall, I don't see, if you do your homework properly, overall, I don't see any disadvantage if you are building up a supply chain from China. You have to consider, of course, the long transportation time, especially for critical products which are sensitive to in-time deliveries. This is something you have to consider.
So, Oliver, let's say I want to purchase critical raw material. How do I go about it? How do I find the right supplier with the best quality?
Yeah. So when you address this question to us, the first thing what we are doing is we sign a secrecy agreement. We are business professionals, and at the beginning of such a project, it's always important to agree on a secrecy agreement. Then we exchange the required information. For example, if you have a technical package, how to produce this product, then we are very happy to receive this. And of course, we exchange confidential information. What is really your request? Are you looking for an alternative supplier? Are you looking for certain quantities of the product? Where do you stand in the development of this material? And then we take this information and check within our network, are there potential candidates who can produce this, or maybe who are already producing this? And then we approach them and check the total background of these companies. So what is the ownership of the company? Where are they located? Which technologies do they have in-house? Where do they invest the money? How strong are they in R&D? How strong are they in engineering? So we do the whole background checkup. And of course, what is very important, especially in China, you have probably heard about the war against pollution in China. There are so many changes in the last couple of years. The environmental policies became very strict. So we have to check, does this potential supplier have all the right policies in place? Do they fulfill all the environmental policies? Do they have wastewater cleaning, waste incineration, all these things? So is there any risk that they might be forced to close down? Because you can imagine, when we are doing this project, it would be a disaster if we find a suitable supplier, the supplier gets the approval, and then all of a sudden they have to close due to some infringement of environmental policies.
Yeah, that would be unfortunate. And it's
Yes.
interesting that you also mention it because when I talk to Shoab Malek, he comes from India, and he told me that 70% of the material they import from China. And the reason for that is because many of those materials they are not allowed to produce in India because of their laws against pollution. So the question is what happens and how can it also impact the Indian market if in China suddenly companies will close because of this. I don't know. It's not our topic right now, but this is a thought that occurred in my mind because all the supply chain is completely connected, and all, even India, who can produce things at lower costs than Europe, for example, still depends on China.
Yeah, there were a lot of supply interruptions in the last couple of years due to these new policies. And these policies were implemented, you can say, overnight. And then all of a sudden, your supplier of a raw material or intermediate disappeared overnight, and then you have no alternative, maybe. So I would say this is a development. On the one hand, it's a very good development, but it's like many things in China, it's happening very, very fast. So if you are in a situation that your supplier has to close down the production, has to stop production, then it's really difficult to find alternatives. And I can say these environmental policies which have been implemented in China now, some of them are even more strict compared to the policies we have in Europe, in North America, or also in India. So I expect that this consolidation of the chemical, of the pharmaceutical industry in China will continue.
Mhm. And it's a very interesting point. So if you say it's even much more strict than India, so where we are heading, it's also very interesting because the Indian market has a huge impact on the whole world because they're a huge player in the pharma market. And you mentioned that it all happens very quickly in China. Why is that?
Well, many things in China are changing, are happening very fast, and the implementation of these new policies, this happened very fast because I think all the people, including the politicians, realized how bad the situation was in China. Many people died because of the air pollution, so this problem was very, very obvious. So in wintertime, when you travel to Beijing, you can really feel, you can really smell the bad air, the pollution. So this problem was obvious for everybody. And I think that's the main reason why the government introduced these policies very fast, very quick.
Okay, and do they give the companies some time to adjust or heads off?
I would say they have to implement, or they have to react to these policies very, very fast. Yeah. And sometimes so fast that you cannot react in the way, okay, we are upgrading our wastewater facility because the time frame is too small. It takes some time, it takes some investment. So then the only alternative is that they close down. And if they don't fulfill the policy, then the authorities are closing the company. And it can happen if the company is located in a chemical park that not only this individual company is closed down, then maybe the whole chemical site, the whole chemical park has to close, has to shut down.
And why is it so difficult to find an alternative?
Because, well, if you have one type of chemistry, which is, let's say, quite causing pollution, then of course all these manufacturers are facing the same issue, the same problem. And of course, the chemical industry is concentrated in certain provinces, not the same across the whole country. And these provinces have more or less the same policies. So then all of these suppliers are affected the same way. I heard stories that one of our clients lost all three raw material suppliers within 1 week because they were all facing the same problem. They were all in China, and they were all facing the same problem, and they all had to shut down within 1 week.
That's catastrophic for the company.
Yes, and within 1 week you cannot find alternative
No.
supplier,
And even
qualify.
if, yeah, of course, even if you can find it, it will take you a lot of
Yes.
time to qualify it. And so, what would you suggest in such situations? Should the companies keep such things in mind and have secondary suppliers in
Yes,
secondary
absolutely.
countries?
Yeah, absolutely. A single supply situation is always a very bad thing. As long as you can find alternatives, it's, I would say, for a procurement person, it's mandatory to qualify a second or a third supplier, even if this supplier is more expensive or has other disadvantages. But if you are in a simple supply situation, a single supply situation, then you have no chance if for any reason this supplier has to stop production. And even if you have a second or third supplier which is not as good or more expensive, it's better than having nothing. And then, of course, it would be, I think, the best solution that your suppliers are not in the same region. They are spread across the globe, maybe one in Europe, one in Asia, and one in Americas. That would be, I think, the best case. But unfortunately, for many raw materials, this is a kind of dream. It's simply not the reality.
You mentioned that it takes time to find the right company. So, what are actually the challenges in finding the right company?
One challenge is there are so many, yeah,
Mhm.
and you have to really identify what is the portfolio, the technology portfolio of one company. I can give you an example. When you have a synthesis, you have to identify what is the key step of the synthesis. As an example, if it's a high pressure hydrogenation, then you have to find somebody who is qualified to do a high pressure hydrogenation. There are many, yeah, but you have to find who is the best one, who can fulfill the demand in the best way. And then, of course, you have to do again the background check. And maybe a company has a very good technology position, but then you identify the financial situation of the company is not very solid. So these are all things you have to take into consideration. So that's why it takes quite some time to identify a suitable producer of such an intermediate or raw material.
It's quite understandable that there are so many, but you need the right quality. And so you need actually people on the ground that do the research.
Yes, that's absolutely mandatory. You cannot do it, let's say, from abroad. You have to have reliable people. Um, our experience is the best combination is that you have local people who can speak Chinese, but who have also a background in international companies. So these people, they are aware of the expectations of your client in terms of quality, in terms of documentation, in terms of compliance. But then also, if you are working in a foreign company, it's also very important that you go to China, that you visit this company when you have done the pre-selection to show up, to show that you are serious about this and to talk to the people, to have a look at the production site. Um, I think the best combination is a local expert together with somebody from the foreign company as a team. That is our experience. This combination is the best way forward.
Mhm. And I bet the cultural differences also play a big role here.
Yes, cultural differences, like in every
Mhm.
country, are very important to understand and to realize, and of course, to respect these differences. Don't try to do business the way you are used to at home. This doesn't work. That's why it's also very important to have a local person because they are familiar. They are also a kind of bridge between, let's say, the business attitude, the business practice in China compared to the foreign country. So it's important to realize this and to respect these
Mhm.
differences.
And what are the main differences actually?
What are the
Like the
main
biggest.
differences? Yeah, I think in every country in the world, it's very important in business that you build up a relationship. But my experience is in China, it's even more important. I would say relationship is everything. If you are not able to build up a relationship with your supplier, with your manufacturing company, then the whole business will be very difficult. I can give you an example. We were trying to start some business with a company in China a couple of years ago, and for some reason we always failed. But we always kept in contact, and whenever I was in China, I visited them. So over the years, we built up some relationship. And then all of a sudden, last year, we had again the chance to do something together, and then we knew each other already. So then it was very easy, very straightforward to start the business. So it's very important to build up a relationship, to listen to the people, and to respect them also for these cultural differences. Don't try to bring your own way of business and believe that's the only way. Then you will fail.
Mm. So it's for them it's very important the personal relationship, not just the business one. They want really to connect on a personal level.
Yes, I think it's very difficult, and probably the business won't be successful if, let's say, the technical terms, the business terms are okay, but for some reason you cannot build a personal relationship, then sooner or later it will fail. Yeah.
Mhm. So you really need the middleman because for people from Europe or USA that are not from China, because the culture's quite different. So the middleman is
I
very
don't want to
important.
say that it's absolutely mandatory, but let's say if you have a local colleague, this will help a lot, because this colleague um, can help you to avoid any misunderstandings, any difficult situation. So it's much easier. But of course, it's not mandatory. If you are willing to spend a lot of time, if you are willing to travel many times to China, you might achieve it even without such a person. But our experience is it's much easier and much faster if you have a person who is familiar with the local situation, who is capable of speaking the language. So this will accelerate your project a lot.
Mm. So if the people, for if the companies in Europe, for example, go through a mediator, it means that they themselves don't have to build those personal relationship because they trust the middleman.
Maybe at the beginning of a project, yes, such a middleman would do a kind of pre-selection
Mm.
of suitable candidates. But at a certain point, it's very, very important also to show up at this company, to meet them, to discuss, to look at to make an inspection at in the production site, and of course, what is very important, to have common dinner. Yeah, that's very important. So you cannot leave the middleman alone doing the whole project. At a certain stage, you also have to show up. That's very important.
How open they are for visits, for audits.
I think very, very open. Sometimes I have the feeling they are even a little bit proud to show what they have and to guide you around. And I never had the experience that they are hiding something or don't like to show their production. I would understand this, that somehow the relationship or the whole project is not on a good way if they would reject showing me the production, or let's say to the middleman, showing the production to the middleman. I would understand this, that something is not right. No, it's I basically I never had this experience. It's more like they like to show what they are doing, what they have, and they are uh, somehow also proud of this, which is okay.
Mhm. Yeah, because I remember I read some posts from someone. I think I've seen it through you actually, about a story where somebody wanted to audit a company, but they said you must pay an entrance fee and place an order before you are allowed to enter our plant.
No, that's totally ridiculous. That is not professional. And if somebody would make such a proposal to me, this would be immediately the signal, no, this is not the right partner. This is not common practice. Maybe now in this very special time for certain products which are in high demand, maybe some people try to take advantage in such a way, but no, this is absolutely not common practice.
Mhm. I'm glad to hear it because it was a bit a scary
No, it would
story.
it's ridiculous. Yeah, such an inspection is part of the normal, is part of the project
Mhm.
of the product development, and if I have to pay any entrance fee, that's ridiculous.
Mhm.
No,
So I understand that people and some companies don't like being audited, but I think those are the extremes. So it's good that it's not a normal act.
no, it's not
It's
normal.
not part, because sometimes when you don't know the culture, you may be fooled to think that something is normal.
Yeah, exactly. That's of course, if you are as somebody from Europe or America is going to China for the very first time, you will experience many situations where you are doing some strange things, and you will encounter many misunderstandings. But that's quite normal. Yeah, and take it easy. And that's also again the role of the middleman. This person will help to facilitate the business, to get in contact with companies, and then it's much easier.
What are the normal procedures when you come to such meetings? So I know that um, I know that when you present people from China your card, your business card, it's very important. It's like a ritual. So you're not allowed to stick it in your pocket or throw it on the table. You need really to appreciate it, look at it, thank them.
Yeah, I think, yeah, when you start reading about what is the business attitude, the business style in China, you read about these recommendations. Nowadays, I would say relax, just behave the normal way. It's not so strict anymore. Now, when you visit a company, you will be surprised how many young people you will meet, yeah, which are, let's say, CEO or head of production, and they are, let's say, 30, 35 years old. And I think especially this young generation don't pay so much attention to these details. I think it's good when you know about this and when you try to follow this, but it's not, let's say, it's not a no-go, or it will not kill the project if you are not following these rules very precisely. It's good to know a little bit about this, but don't take it too serious.
Mhm. Okay. And what would kill a deal?
Ah, very difficult to say what would kill the deal. Um, I think I think it's good to give them time. If you make a proposal for a project, give them some time to think about it. Don't try to push them to any decision. Um, just wait, be patient. Sometimes such decisions are made very quickly. Sometimes it takes a long time. So just be patient. Listen to the middleman, to the local expert. They always can also um, get some feelings in the course of discussions. What's going on? Are they happy with the proposal or not? So I think if you are pushing too much, but that's the same in any other country, that could be a kind of killer for the project.
Mhm. And are there specific areas in China where the best or modern companies are located, or you really need to search all around because the country is huge?
The country is huge, but if you are cooperating, if you are co-working with the right people, of course they know the industry. It's the same like what we know here, for example, in Europe about the industry. So for certain topics, they always have a list of potential candidates. And of course, you check these candidates first who have already a track record, who have already some recommendation from other projects, who have experience, who have references. But sometimes you don't find any suitable production partner, for example, or supplier. Of course, then you ask within your network about some advice, some recommendations for another company. So yes, the country is very big. There are a lot of companies, but I think those people who have some experience in the country, they know a number of candidates, and then you have to work on these. And only in case you don't find anybody, then you have to broaden the scope, talk to more people, and ask them for more recommendations. That's also one thing what we do. We go by recommendations if we don't know a company by ourselves. We are not going through any database or any other market intelligence service. It's more the personal recommendation within our network of people.
Do you go to those companies yourself because before you recommend them to your clients? You do some audit?
Yes, we do. We do a kind of inspection. It's not like a full audit, but we want to make sure that it's a suitable candidate before we disclose the name of the company or before we give the recommendation to our client. Hey, this is a suitable candidate. Of course, we want to be sure that this is really a suitable candidate. And so that's why it's absolutely mandatory for us to go there, to see the production, to see the company, and to talk to the people. That's absolutely mandatory before we make a recommendation to our client.
A question about the quality and the qualification. How easy is it to get the documentation? Do all the suppliers know the procedures and do they understand the expectation of the European and the American regulations that they need to provide specific documentation for the raw material?
I think most of the companies are very open, no problem to get the documents, but the understanding of the importance of the documents is different. If you are talking to a big company, big pharmaceutical company who has already international experience, it's no problem. They know exactly what we are looking for. But if it's a smaller company, maybe with not so much experience, they are not always aware which type of documents are necessary. And it's on the one hand, what we check, on the one hand, we check, let's say, the local documents that they have, for example, a business license. And then, of course, let's say all the documents regarding the quality. And they are willing to present these documents. And what we are doing is, and this is also mandatory, we check each and every document very, very carefully. We don't rely on the document what we get. We don't trust this piece of paper. We always do additional checks if it's a real document, and we always double check it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I have also an experience of my own dealing with Chinese suppliers. It was during the qualification of a manufacturer who produces packaging materials. And during the qualification, I had to review some documentations that they sent us, and then we get from our procurement department some documents, and on one document we have one company name with one address, on the other we have completely different company name and address. I started to get confused. Everybody in the procurement started to get confused, and then it took time until we had all the communication sorted out, and it then we found out that it's quite common in China to open several companies to reduce some taxes, and
Yes.
then and it complicated all the activities because we had to wait for the CEO of the company to sign some document that this is the same company under the same roof. So it was for us strange because it's two documentation for the same product with different company names. So
Yes.
I guess if you're more aware about the market, it's something that's probably not that surprising.
Yes, this can happen. I have a similar experience a couple of times that I made a appointment with a company, and when I arrived at this company with my local colleague, then we stand in front of the door of a totally different company name. But then we realized, or we were told, okay, this is another company of the same boss, and just for reasons of easier to set up the meeting in an easier way, we meet at this company. So you have to clarify this, and that's why it's also very important that you have a local person, because the Chinese can realize, hey, at which company are we right now? Yeah. Or I can give you another example. The definition in China, what is a producer, is a little bit different according to our understanding. What is a producer? So if you ask somebody, are you a producer of this? Then they say yes, even if they don't have an own manufacturing facility. But let's say the friend of a brother has a manufacturing facility, then they still understand themselves as a manufacturer. So you really have to look who is really the manufacturer. What is the manufacturing company? Another example, I also recommend to visit trade shows, exhibitions in China, because like many other trade shows, you can do a lot of meetings, you can see and you can meet a lot of people in a very short period of time. And of course, it's you are highly welcome to visit these booths and have discussions there. It's very efficient. And there are a lot of small exhibitors, and for example, they offer 30 different APIs. No company in the world is producing all of these 30 APIs, because behind these are different production technologies. But when you ask this exhibitor, are you a producer? They say yes. Of course, you know it's not true, because nobody in the world is producing all these APIs. And then when you ask a little bit more, then you learn, okay, they are the manufacturers of 5 of these APIs, and the other 25, they come from companies where they have a good relationship, maybe a good friend within the same network. So these are the little things you have to experience, and um, they are important to understand, and then you have a much better picture of these suppliers, of these manufacturers. What are really their capabilities?
It's really fascinating how much a person needs to learn about different markets and how different it is. So, how big is the market, the export market of raw materials for the pharma industry right now, in comparison to how much companies buy from the same land or neighboring lands? Because from my experience, I cannot recall that we sourced a lot or at all from China, only the packaging materials.
Since China is the biggest market for chemicals, both in production and in consumption, I think the proportion of export is very high. And we know all about our dependence on China, especially for pharmaceuticals, generics, intermediates. So we in Europe, in Americas, and also India being the biggest generic manufacturer, but we all depend on the supply from China. So if for any reason this supply is interrupted, then after some time we are in trouble, because we do not have these alternatives. Now we have the situation where we realize, even before the current crisis, a lot of pharmaceuticals are in short supply, and now the politicians stand up and say, and they are demanding, hey, we need this pharmaceutical production back in Europe. It's very easy to say this, but I think it takes 3 to 5 years to set up a GMP plant in Europe. So it's very easy to demand this on the one side, but the reality is different.
Yeah, because it's not that easy to grow companies from nowhere
Yes.
that they produce the amounts that are produced in China and the variety that is produced from China.
Right.
So
Right.
they can demand companies, they can suggest companies to produce some materials, but it may not be convenient or profitable for them, as for China.
Yes, and let's say in many countries, especially here in Europe, over the last 10, 15 years, let's say the conditions to produce, for example, generics are simply not favorable. That's why these productions disappeared, and that's why we see them now in other countries like in India and in China, of course.
You mentioned the shortage, and now with the Corona crisis, how do you see the situation right now? Because if we will feel or we get to know the feeling of shortage, it would probably be during this Corona crisis.
Yeah, I think, well, I would describe the situation like this. Right now, I would estimate that 80% of the chemical and the pharmaceutical industry is in operation again in China, maybe not at full capacity. And I heard from a couple of companies now they have the difficulties to export because in the export countries now we have the situation of a lockdown or we have logistic issues. So now it's more the situation that the exports are more difficult. I don't think that it's a matter of supply right now. So compared to, let's say, 2 months before, the picture changed. Yeah, then the country, China, was under lockdown, logistics were difficult, and it was difficult to get material from China. Now it changed a little bit. I think now production is back again to quite a big extent. But now, what I hear from a couple of companies, they have now problems because export is difficult in terms of logistics, and for certain products, there's simply no demand.
Why is that? Because the companies in in those countries stop the manufacturing because
Yes,
of the Corona.
yes.
Okay, so it's a chain of events. They cannot easily export because there are not enough employees. Also, probably in other countries because the other countries in
Exactly.
Europe and so on are
Yeah.
in lockdown in the USA. So everything the chain stops. And do you see also shortages right now with your clients or other pharmaceutical companies?
Let's say already before the crisis, there was a shortage for certain pharmaceuticals, and I think now with the crisis, this became even a much bigger problem. Yeah, and the whole development of this shortage is accelerated now by this crisis. So it seems to me that this crisis is not causing really a very new shortage, but the shortages which we had already before are now just getting bigger and accelerated.
Why is there a shortage already beforehand? Because of those new pollution laws?
That is one reason, yes, because a lot of companies had to shut down, and there were no alternatives. So it's a consolidation of the industry. The number of producers, the number of players in this market is getting reduced, and so that is one reason why certain uh, APIs, certain intermediates are in shortage.
Mhm. And what do you see in the future of the business relationship with China? How does it look? The foresight for the future. Would the cooperation grow with time, or there would be problems because of some shortages or closures that companies would look for other alternatives?
I hope it's a combination of both. I personally, I'm very much in favor that we improve our business, our trade relations with China. I'm a strong supporter of global supply, but on the other hand, I think for certain products, it's always good to have an alternative. And if we identify for a certain let's say, API, that there are not sufficient alternatives, then we have to build up these alternatives probably at another place, not in China. And then there is one thing, of course, what we should not forget: China is a very, very big market, and I think no pharmaceutical company and no chemical company can afford to have no presence in that country. The market is very big, and the pharmaceutical market in China is increasing. It's growing. Yeah, so nobody can afford to have no presence in this market.
So, Oliver, thank you very much for all this information. I also find the Chinese market a very important player, and it's really great that there are people who are helping to and guiding companies to connect with the Chinese market and with the other ones in the world. So, thank you for that, for sharing this interesting information. And if people want to contact you for guidance, advice, how can they find you?
Yeah, Jan, first of all, thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to discuss a little bit about China, our experience in this market. People who would like to get in contact with me, just drop an email at info@xenopschemicals.com. That's the best way to contact me.
Perfect. So again, Oliver, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for watching this episode of the Qualitox podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you did, consider subscribing and watch the other episodes on qualistory.com. Stay compliant and see you in the next one.